Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Houston, the Executive Director of the Wolf River Conservancy. Let me welcome you all to tonight's lecture, which is part of our ongoing educational outreach to the community. We're very excited about sharing tonight's program featuring Dr. David Brasher of Ducks Unlimited. But first, I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that next Saturday, the Conservancy is hosting its first Saturday paddle down the Ghost River section of the Wolf River. Please see our website, wolfriver.org, for RSVP and registration information. I'd also like to acknowledge all of our benefactors for 2024. They are the Crawford Howard Family Foundation, TC Energy, Bank of America, AutoZone, FedEx, the Hyde Family Foundation, Buckman, International Paper, Jim Karras Subaru, Terminex, Ring Container Technologies, Brother International Corporation, First Horizon Foundation, and Sylvana. Thank you for their ongoing support. Of course, all of our supporters, corporations, individual donors, and volunteers are critically important in allowing us to deliver on our mission, the protection and enhancement of the Wolf River watershed as a sustainable natural resource. As always, gifts of any size are appreciated. Please see our website at www.wolfriver.org/give. And finally, a few housekeeping details. We ask that you do not attempt to record this program with any device. If you have questions during the program, please use the Q&A feature and not the chat box. Our Education Director, Kathy, will be monitoring the questions and will ask them after the program. Now, it is my pleasure to present to you our speaker for this evening. Dr. Brasher joined Ducks Unlimited in 2005 and currently serves as Senior Waterfowl Scientist at Ducks Unlimited's national headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee. Prior to this role, he served for 13 years as biological team leader for the Gulf Coast Joint Venture in Lafayette, Louisiana, where he helped identify priority waterfowl research and incorporate results into landscape-scale conservation planning. In his current position, Dr. Brasher collaborates with Ducks Unlimited staff and partners to strengthen the scientific foundation of DU's conservation activities, ensuring that Ducks Unlimited's habitat work is focused on issues and places of greatest importance to continental waterfowl populations. Dr. Brasher, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And we'll try to share my screen. I can do this correctly. So are you seeing the full screen?
Yes.
All right. Good. Okay, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join y'all tonight. I'm here in our Ducks Unlimited studio at our national headquarters up at the Agri Center, and I will talk with you tonight about a variety of the work that we do as an organization, have a little background on who we are as an organization at the start, but then I'll talk about some of the places where we work, how we use science to inform some of our decision making, and then I'll talk about some of the new things that we're doing as an organization and some of how we're growing to take advantage by taking advantage of all of the other benefits that come from wetlands and wetlands conservation. And so I hope you find this information useful. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Ducks Unlimited. I hope I'm able to share a few additional bits of information, especially as it relates to some of our growth over these recent years. And if I can get this to advance. There we go. So our mission, we'll start there, sort of as a grounding place. We conserve, restore, and manage wetlands and associated habitats for North America's waterfowl. We have recognized for quite some time, though, that these habitats also benefit other wildlife and people. And so then I also like to orient to this kind of weird notion that there is an organization devoted to a certain suite of animals, in this case, waterfowl, and that's we're not necessarily unique in that regard. There are other organizations such as the National Wild Turkey Federation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and so forth. But we've been in existence for 87 years, and we've made it through through depressions and economic downturns, and we are larger now in terms of staff and revenue than we ever have been. And so, this idea that we can be successful in our activities when we're centered around a single group of organisms is pretty cool. Waterfowl are some of the most charismatic species on the planet. They are very active during the daytime. They are very large birds. They are migratory in nature, and by that alone, they connect people across different landscapes. The birds that we have down here during winter, the same birds that people in Canada and Alaska and other locations will have during the summer. So there's some inherent connection across large geographies that these birds provide. They're obviously some of the most intensively studied animals on the planet. A lot of that relates to their existence as a game species, a harvested species, dating all the way back to the market hunting era, and a host of pieces of legislation that brought an end to market hunting and introduced the regulated harvest of this renewable resource. And that is, in honesty, one of the primary reasons why there has been so much study and so much energy and so much money devoted to this group of animals. And that was at sort of the heart of concern for the founders of Ducks Unlimited. But waterfowl are also some of the most colorful and entertaining groups of birds out there. They are popular subjects for photographers, for bird watchers, and so they captivate large segments of society for many different reasons. I'll talk briefly now about how Ducks Unlimited came about and when we came about. We were founded in 1937 in the midst of sort of an ecological crisis, that being the Dust Bowl. And this was after market hunting had been outlawed, but people still were very, very passionate about hunting waterfowl. A lot of duck clubs across North America were, and duck hunters across North America were becoming very concerned about the decline of duck populations at a time when much of the mid-continent was going through drought and the Dust Bowl era. And so that's what led in 1937 to our founders back then wanting to do something, and brought together this grand idea of trying, and as some of our staff say, this very audacious goal of ours to influence waterfowl populations at a continental scale. And that's exactly what we set out to do when we were founded in 1937. And our founders pretty early on realized that the key to doing so was to protect, conserve, enhance the habitat base that these animals relied on. They saw what was happening as a result of the drought, and they knew that the solution was fundamentally rested in habitat. We are a family of organizations that recognizes this international migratory nature of these birds. This extends not only to waterfowl, of course, but all migratory birds that transcend political boundaries. And if we wanted to be successful at this audacious goal of influencing populations at a continental scale, you have to be able to affect habitats at a continental scale. And that's what led to the founding of 3 different organizations under the Ducks Unlimited banner. DU Inc. here in the States, DU Canada, of course, north of us, founded in 1938. And then Ducks Unlimited de Mexico was founded in 1974. Just last week, Ducks Unlimited de Mexico celebrated their 50-year anniversary down in Cabo San Lucas, I believe it was. Our headquarters are here in Memphis, Tennessee, in the heart of the Mississippi Flyway. We have been here since the early 90s. We have 4 regional offices, one in California, the Central Valley of California, one in Bismarck, North Dakota, one just outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, a southern regional office in Ridgeland, Mississippi, just north of Jackson. And we have a government affairs office that does the heavy lifting on our policy work out of Washington, D.C. We have roughly 600,000 members. That number fluctuates a little bit, but the members are the lifeblood of our organization, along with our volunteers. The volunteers come in a variety of different different age brackets now. We have grown our member base and our volunteer base by expanding into the high school as well as university space. And our volunteers are the ones that make it possible for us to exist as an organization. They are the one that lead our banquets, our fundraising banquets all across the U.S. They are the ones that help us grow, help us attract those members, those more than 600,000 members. And it's the funds that are raised at these banquets, these grassroots fundraising events, that allow Ducks Unlimited to be nimble, that allow us to operate and hire people that then go out and secure additional grants to deliver habitat conservation work. The money raised through these events also helps us leverage those dollars and maximize the impact of our fundraising. And I suspect everyone on this call, on this webinar, will realize this, but this is our iconic logo. It is one of the most recognizable logos in all of the nonprofit world of wildlife and natural resources conservation. I always like to include this because oftentimes I'm speaking to audiences that may not be familiar with this logo. And so that's one of the take-home points. That's who we are. If you see that duck head, that is us. That's Ducks Unlimited. So when we talk about the habitat types that waterfowl rely on, I mean, it's no secret that waterfowl need water, and water comes in the form, a variety of different forms: wetlands, rivers, marine areas, estuarine areas. All of those habitat types and wetland types have been under pressure for multiple centuries. And it's really those pressures that provide the impetus for Ducks Unlimited to do our conservation work. We can look at this sort of through historical wetland loss estimates here in the Mississippi River watershed, and you see most of these states have experienced wetland loss rates that exceed 50%. It's very interesting that the state that has experienced the lowest wetland loss rate is Louisiana, but when you look at the absolute amount of wetland area that has been lost, Louisiana leads the pack in that regard, because they just have such an expansive wetland base and have historically, but they alone have seen a conversion of over 1.2 million acres of wetland since 1932. And so when you look across this Mississippi River watershed, just as an example, you see the area of what we call potentially restorable wetlands makes up a relatively small portion of that overall watershed, but so what that really means is they have an outsized effect on the productivity of that larger landscape for waterfowl and other water birds that depend on it. And we use graphics and maps of this type, and you can get into even finer scales to help us target specific areas for wetland restoration activities. We are an organization that seeks and uses a lot of information in our decision making every single day. And we prefer to get that information from reputable science. We oftentimes describe ourselves as a science-based organization. We invest heavily in scientific projects, in research. A lot of that historically has focused on understanding the needs of the birds that we care about: waterfowl, ducks, geese, and swans. And we know more about some species of waterfowl than some countries know about their people. And so that arms us with a tremendous understanding of what we need to be doing to support waterfowl populations at continental scales. There are still questions, though, that we have unanswered and that continue to emerge with each passing year, because we do not live in a static world, as I'm sure everyone here knows. And so things change, and we have to continue to invest in the science to help us understand those changes, and then figure out how to respond to best achieve our mission. Although we've invested most heavily and longest in understanding the ecology of waterfowl, increasingly we are expanding our investments in science to other areas. And that really relates to trying to quantify the benefits that wetlands and wetland conservation provides beyond just habitat for waterfowl. You know, there's a group of us that are super passionate about waterfowl, and we think about wetland restoration and conservation primarily because of the benefit that it provides to waterfowl. But not everyone is like us. And so there are a lot of people that care more about just healthy ecosystems, a high degree of biodiversity, and a whole host of other things that I'll get to a little bit later on. And so increasingly, we're investing in science in those areas to help us understand and quantify how we are positively affecting other societal values through our work. One of the places where our science intersects our decision-making most is in the identification of areas where we work, our landscape conservation priorities. These priority areas are influenced primarily by where waterfowl are, where the regions that they depend on most, where their most important habitats are, whether it be the breeding areas that you see in the prairie pothole region of the US and Canada and on up into the boreal forest and Alaska as highest priority breeding geographies. And then down here in our neck of the woods, highest priority wintering landscapes in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, the Gulf Coast, and then out in the Central Valley of California. All of these areas are rich in wetlands of different types, have different functions, and support different groups of birds and different groups of plants and animals of all other types. So what we really do after identifying where we need to work is deliver solutions on the ground. We're trying to conserve, to protect, or restore wetlands to benefit waterfowl and a whole host of other things. And that doesn't just happen by itself. We take action on the ground, and that means we have to interact with landowners, with state and federal partners that own and manage public areas. That means we have an army of biologists out in the field that every day are getting out, boots on the ground, and driving through farm gates and meeting with ranchers and farmers to understand and try to identify opportunities for us to work with them on the solutions that we've identified that are needed for waterfowl. I have a few examples here to talk about. This is a really interesting and quite profound success story up near the Great Lakes. This was once coastal marsh there on Lake Erie. It was levied and then converted to agriculture. And then as years went on, decades went on, it became a little more difficult to farm that area, and an opportunity presented itself to restore that area to a marsh, to a wetland system. And this is the result. And it was done in partnership with Toledo Metro Parks. And it is a pretty phenomenal multi-use restored wetland. It supports fishing, kayaking. I think they even allow some hunting, obviously bird watching, and all sorts of other recreational activities. So this is one of the more notable, higher profile restoration projects that we've completed here the past few years. And there's all sorts of different project activities that we undertake, and a lot of it depends on where we're working and the type of threats that are affecting wetlands in that geography. When you look at some of our tidal systems, they too were levied for agricultural purposes or for ranching purposes back in the day, and through subsidence or other I guess just changes in that system, they become more difficult and less productive as farmland or ranch land. And so we're finding opportunities to go in and restore tidal flow to some of these areas. Also, some areas that were historically impounded for intensive waterfowl management. The increased costs of maintenance and operation is making it difficult to continue those in some locations. And so we're finding those opportunities as well to go in and restore the tidal flows to more of its historical condition. We also, I'll pause here and say, we're also doing an increasing amount of sort of land protection, and most of that is going to be through conservation easements. We have a growing lands team here at National Headquarters that works with private landowners and state and federal partners on a variety of conservation easement programs. And that can be a presentation in itself, describing all of the great work that team is doing. Most of that is going to be through easements rather than fee title acquisition. Ducks Unlimited Incorporated owns and holds very little property in fee title. We may hold some of that temporarily, but oftentimes we will acquire it with a takeout partner, as we call it, already identified. Typically, it's going to be a state or federal agency that will take it and make it as part of their public, their either National Wildlife Refuge or wildlife management area. But we also do a lot of work with conservation easements through our subsidiary, the Wetlands America Trust, a certified land trust here in the U.S. And so a ton of great and exciting work going on there to protect those remaining wetlands that we have. Our policy folks do a tremendous job trying to influence critical pieces of legislation that can do a lot of good or they can do a lot of bad. And we try to have a seat at the table to make sure that when those policy decisions and discussions happen, waterfowl hunters, and all that care about waterfowl and the other benefits from wetlands are adequately represented, whether that be the Farm Bill, whether that be the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, or any other type of bill that may affect and give us opportunities to do wetland restoration and conservation work. With regard to the type of people that we employ, we're more than just biologists. Yes, we have biologists and scientists, but we have a ton of engineers. We're almost a turnkey outfit in terms of being able to identify wetland restoration or conservation opportunities, and then have our staff be the ones to deliver almost every bit of that. We do the project identification, we do the engineering, then we do the grant writing and securing the funds. The only thing we don't do is move the dirt itself. We contract that out with people that have all of the equipment and the expertise to do that, because we work in a ton of different places. We have fundraising staff, development staff, obviously all the human resources support, IT support, legal, you name it, we've got it pretty much. We're an organization of over 700 employees right now. And there's a lot of careers here at Ducks Unlimited that most people don't think of, and we're trying to do a better job sort of advertising those. Just an idea of the type of impact we have in a recent fiscal year. This was FY23. We just closed FY24. The final numbers aren't in yet, or I wasn't able to incorporate them in this presentation. But last year, we conserved 641,000 acres. We affected conservation on 641,000 acres. We had over $300 million in revenue. And the little pie chart here on the right shows where that goes. Over 84% of that funding goes directly to wetlands and waterfowl conservation work in one form or another. Some of this I touched on at the beginning. Over 30,000 volunteers. We had over 560,000 event attendees last year at over 4,500 events. And all of those activities have been incredibly successful. Since 1937, we as a family of organization, across all three organizations, we have conserved over 18 million acres in North America. And that has had, there's quite a bit of pride that goes along with that. This past year, we hit a very significant milestone in that we hit the 18 million acre mark. We also, for the first time ever, were able to deliver conservation activities of one form or another on over 1 million acres. And that incorporates a lot of some short-term activities, as well as some longer-term activities that we count as truly conserved acres that would be added to this 18 million acres. But affecting 1 million acres of any type of conservation activity in a single year is quite a feat. This animated map here will show you the location of these projects through the years. We originally began by doing work only in Prairie, Canada, because that area is so incredibly important for producing ducks during any given year. It's considered the duck factory, the prairie pothole region. So we started out in Canada, and in 1984 we began delivering projects in the United States because we realized there was a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous need to extend our conservation footprint to this area. We don't do this alone. Our work has always been done in partnership with other entities. Since 1986, that work and our priorities and our vision has been in lockstep with something known as the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. It is a essentially a continental agreement between three countries to identify shared objectives for waterfowl populations and to work with the scientific community across all three countries to identify the type of work we need to be doing, where we need to be doing that, and what type of sort of social and ecological considerations need to be factored into all the work that we're doing, and staying aware of that social change and using it to accelerate our conservation activity and ensure that our activity remains relevant to all parts of society. The 2024, this plan is updated approximately every 5 years. The 2024 North American Waterfowl Management Plan update is nearing completion, and we're looking forward to getting our hands on that. And all of this work has been incredibly beneficial to waterfowl, but not just waterfowl, other birds and wildlife species that depend on wetlands. Here's a chart that we reproduced from the 2022 State of the Birds report. I suspect many people here have heard it stated previously that waterfowl and other wetland birds are one of really only two groups of birds that have seen a population increase since the 1970s. There is variation around those population trajectories depending on which species or which groups of waterfowl you're looking at. But the numbers really don't lie. The coordinated conservation efforts to protect and restore wetlands across North America has indeed had a pretty profound effect. And we have to give some of the credit to the birds. They are incredibly resilient in the face of drought and in the face of environmental change and landscape change. They have been able to take advantage of agricultural expansion in some cases that presents challenges in other ways. But these birds, waterfowl, are incredibly resilient, and we like to contribute to that resiliency in those populations. But it's not just about waterfowl anymore. Yes, waterfowl will always be Ducks Unlimited's mission, the heart of our mission, and the focus of our vision. But to remain relevant, as I was talking about a moment ago, we have to remain relevant and to grow our pace and scale of conservation. We have to acknowledge that wetlands provide a host of benefits beyond just habitat for waterfowl or any other kind of animal. They do a host of things, such as filtering nutrients and sediment from the water. They provide places to recreate. They attenuate floodwaters. They provide a habitat for pollinators. They provide, when we get into coastal areas, they provide nursery habitat. They sequester carbon, some of these habitats in some locations. All of those services, ecosystem services, as we refer to them, are beneficial to large swaths, essentially all of society in one way or another. And a lot of the science that we're doing now is trying to quantify those benefits. One of the simplest things to imagine is that wetland loss equals the loss of water storage. And we've seen that with increasingly intense storm and increasingly intense floods downstream from areas that have experienced substantial wetland loss rates. And our friends in DU Canada have quantified this. They looked at two different landscapes, one where wetlands remained largely intact and one in which the wetlands had been largely drained, and they measured the downstream flows after significant rain events. And not surprisingly, we see a difference. But this type of information is necessary to provide that scientific documentation of the benefits of retaining intact wetland basins on a landscape. Healthy wetlands equals clean water. In one form or another, they're removing sediments, they're removing nutrients, whether it be nitrogen or phosphorus. That varies based on which landscape we're talking about. And we can even see the results in some cases. And we always try to put numbers to these, but this type of picture is also very, very valuable and compelling depending on the audience. Wetlands in some locations serve a very valuable role in recharging the aquifer. We're here in Memphis, and so we have a very valuable aquifer, one of the best in the world, if not the best. The Ogallala Aquifer in the Great Plains is one that has experienced significant declines in the levels in that aquifer, and we're starting to work with municipalities in that landscape to help them understand the value of wetlands in restoring their aquifer and getting them on board with wetland restoration, not for waterfowl habitat, but for aquifer recharge, actually incorporating wetland restoration into some of their long-term water supply plans. And so that's a really impactful story about how the work we do can motivate others in different ways to get on board with our conservation mission. We also are looking at ways to use the work, our habitat work, to contribute to climate mitigation, getting involved with the carbon market in some locations. Wetlands are a little bit of a tricky issue in that regard, because yes, they will sequester carbon, but yes, they also emit methane. But when we talk about conversion of grasslands in the prairies, we oftentimes try to, we seek easements, try to use easements to prevent the conversion of those grasslands and sort of avoiding the loss of the release of carbon into the atmosphere. All of this new work that we're doing sort of falls under the banner of sustainability and ecosystem services. And there are a host of corporations and countries that are now increasingly promoting sustainability as a way of doing business, as a critical component of what we have a responsibility to invest in. And we as an organization are quantifying the sustainability and ecosystem service benefits of the work that we do, and then in turn attracting those new partners to help us with our wetland conservation activities, and then we are helping them meet their sustainability goals in turn. And this is what some of this looks like on a simplified approach, where we can quantify the ecosystem services, whether it be water conserved or water stored, carbon removed, fertilizer removed from waterways, and then of course waterfowl benefits as well. And we can sell those benefits to other interested parties that may have an interest in one or more of these sort of ecological outcomes or ecosystem outcomes for meeting their sustainability goals. Ultimately, for Ducks Unlimited, as I mentioned, waterfowl is why we were formed. Waterfowl will remain the core of what we focus on and will direct where we do some of our work. But we're growing in diverse ways. We're adding staff with the type of expertise that I never really imagined that we would see within Ducks Unlimited. But it's an incredibly exciting time. We have soil scientists. We have water scientists, we have ecosystem services scientists, and we have a host of other expertise represented, and all of those folks are helping us be relevant to larger groups of people and society. Here we are back to the original motivation, these charismatic animals, whether we're talking about waterfowl or these beautiful water birds that are just absolutely some of the most amazing creatures on the planet, land birds that occupy these wetland environments. Again, just a colorful array. I would imagine a lot of folks here on this call are motivated by these types of images. This is why these are the things that we connect with, whether it be insects, fish, mammals, you name it. Our wetland systems provide services and provide healthy habitats for all of these creatures. And then it's where we recreate. It's where we connect with with these systems for one reason or another. If we're a kid playing in the grass, if we're out with friends and family in a kayak just enjoying the day, or whether we hunt or fish, all of these things are provided by the work that we do and our partners do. And it's what makes this job, personally very special, because you're contributing to something that makes a difference in the lives of other people. And at the end of the day, we're striving to be something bigger than ourselves, to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and to leave the world a little bit better than we found it, or else help it not be so bad as it would be if we weren't part of it. And, friends and family, this is also very special experiences that we've all had. It's how I got into this career. with my dad and my mom and of course my friends through the years. And so these are the moments that we reflect on and provide a strong motivating factor for so many of us here at Ducks Unlimited, and I'm sure you all as well. I think I've left plenty of time for questions, and that was kind of my plan. And so I will stop sharing at this moment. Okay, so you've done that for me. And so I'm happy to take any questions that folks may have.
Thank you so much for that wonderful overview, Dr. Brasher, of your work, which kind of parallels our own on a much, much larger scale. I have a couple of questions here from a viewer. The first one is, what are more ways that Ducks Unlimited, Wolf River Conservancy, and other organizations can cooperate and step up efforts to protect Tennessee wetlands, especially in light of the proposed laws in the Tennessee legislature removing wetland protections?
You know, the first step there, I shouldn't say the easiest, the first step is to make our voices heard. Ducks Unlimited has engaged in some of those conversations. We have been active in Nashville in those meetings, in those stakeholder groups. We have gone to testify along with some of our volunteers, along with some of our partners. And so that's number one, making sure people know that we value these things and that they're worth protecting. And we have to recognize that this is a complicated world that we live in, and we have to choose our strategies wisely. And that's always a tricky thing. But the very first step is to make sure people know without any question that we value these systems. And then I think we look for opportunities to work together at more local scales where we can. We have biologists that are out in the field that are actually doing a lot of that work, and we typically the way this operates is that someone approaches us with an idea for a wetland protection or restoration or enhancement project. Our biologist will go on a site visit with them, and we'll evaluate whether it's something that we can help with. A lot of times that would mean we do grant writing. We don't have, despite being a $300 million organization, a significant portion of that funding comes from public grants. And it comes to us sort of already linked to certain projects. And so it's not like we have funds that we can just move around to different projects. There is some sort of unrestricted funding that we leverage and devote to quite a number of projects. But the $1 and $2 and $3 million restoration or protection projects are those that we have identified a need for, and then our staff have done a phenomenal job applying for and being awarded the funds through other grant programs to actually do that work. So it can sometimes be a lengthy process, but it's not necessarily complicated in terms of the steps involved in it. Identify a need, talk with one of our biologists if it's in an area that's a priority for us, and if it's something that we think we have the expertise to contribute to, then the conversations continue, and we see where it goes from there.
Yeah. Okay, here's another question. What is your thinking about preservation of contiguous wetlands versus fragmented areas? For birds, since they can fly, maybe it's not so much of an issue, or is it?
Oh, I think that depends on what species we're talking about. That's what makes this really interesting. Whether we're just talking about waterfowl, whether talking about waterfowl or a whole larger suite of birds. There's like 43 species of waterfowl in North America, and even within those 43 species, they have different habitat requirements. They're experiencing different trajectories in some instances. So as much as we would like to identify a single strategy for conserving bird habitats, there is no single one that will satisfy the needs of all species. And like I said, that even includes a group as small as waterfowl with 43 species. And when you get into migratory land birds, which numbers in the hundreds, then yeah, there are species that have evolved to benefit from different types of habitats and configurations of habitats. And so there are some difficult choices that have to be made sometimes whenever you have limited funds to invest in certain types of projects. And sometimes there just aren't as many of those contiguous areas remaining. So, there are without getting too far down this other road, I'll just say there's not an easy answer to that. I think it sort of depends on the species that is the target, or the group of species that is the target for your conservation efforts. For some of them, it doesn't matter a whole lot. They all do have wings and they can fly, but the productivity of those birds, their ability to survive and reproduce and hatch new young and raise those young will differ from one habitat type to the next. And so that's what keeps all of us bird scientists asking questions and keeps us occupied with additional research.
Okay. Your slide about the Oglala Aquifer and the map that showed intense level two, is that level 2? I'm not sure what that word is for the person who submitted this. Intense recoverable wetlands. Okay.
Showed
they've used some in Illinois. Okay. Let me try again. I'm going to start again. Your slide about the Oglala Aquifer and the map that showed intense something, recoverable wetlands in Illinois, etc. It seems like industrial agriculture is one of the primary forces working against conservation. How do we address that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that agriculture has been one of the driving forces behind conversion of wetlands and other historical sort of ecosystems. And there's even research that comes out, ongoing research, and multiple studies have identified the intensification of agriculture in the U.S. and Canadian prairies as one of the primary drivers for declining productivity and declining population sizes of breeding ducks in some of those geographies. So that's no secret. And we, at the same time, we don't want to disparage our nation's farmers, because they are serving an incredibly valuable role for all of us in providing food and fiber and fuel and the things that we all have to have. And, we could, for Ducks Unlimited, we take an approach of wanting to work to identify mutually beneficial solutions. We realize that farmers and ranchers are trying to make a living, and they're providing the services that we need. And they struggle also with some of the economic forces that are working against them. And we believe, and we've demonstrated through a lot of our programs, that there are ways that we can work together to help them still be profitable with their operations, while improving the quality of those lands for waterfowl or other wildlife. We also do adhere to the idea that there are some places that probably should not be farmed. And so let's find the land uses that are most conducive for those properties, for those areas. And that's one of the reasons why we are a strong supporter of ranching in some of those prairie landscapes. Ranching and cattle and ducks and wetlands can all thrive. And so a strong beef market goes a long way in keeping intact wetlands and grasslands on the landscape in some of our most important breeding geographies for waterfowl. With regard to the intensification of agriculture in some of the other areas in Midwestern U.S., again, we're not, we recognize the landscape in which we live at this point, and we try to develop solutions, conservation solutions that will improve it. We can't get it back to the historical conditions, and nor would we necessarily want to from an economic prosperity standpoint and providing all the things that we need. But there are things that we can deliver that will help remove nutrients from our streams, help remove sediment from our streams, and in turn help farmers increase their profitability, because they don't want to be putting excess nutrients on the fields and in the streams any more than we do. And so that's the philosophy that we take when working with farmers across North America. We want to be some of their best partners. We want to help. We want to understand the challenges they face, and where our interests overlap, we want to be the first ones at their door offering a solution that's useful for them, but also for our mission.
Okay, that's great. I've got a question, which is we have just recently on one of our small properties here in Memphis near the Wolf River created two wetlands. They're basically retention ponds with a seed mix. And I am just wondering, you had mentioned impoundments and how they definitely have drawbacks. I'm wondering what the role of created wetlands is, or if it has one, in waterfowl conservation.
Well, we would much rather see existing wetlands protected, and wetlands and areas that once were wetlands but were degraded or drained for one reason or another be the places where we restore those wetlands. And so there, I'm kind of drawing a fine distinction between a few words here: created wetlands versus restored wetlands. A lot of times people will, groups or people or entities or developments will create wetlands where, let's say, they previously did not exist. And those are different from a functional standpoint for wildlife values. And they provide some stormwater retention values and things of the stormwater retention values, and probably a few other benefits. But we certainly prioritize those more natural wetlands or restored wetlands over the retention ponds. And there are some instances, yes, where they do support bird life and other wildlife of various types and fish populations. And so they provide some environmental benefit, but we think there are ways that we can design those better. And I think we've demonstrated that in some areas, even using some of our, using sort of sewage treatment wetlands as an example, where some of those can be among the most productive. And we've partnered with a few different municipalities in various locations to use restored wetlands for that purpose. So, so that's kind of our preference. And we don't do a lot of the stormwater or any, as far as I'm aware, stormwater retention, because the habitat values that they provide just aren't really what we're looking for.
Okay, well, here's a follow-up question from someone else. Can you talk a little about DU staff collaborating with landscape architects on wetland creation and enhancement, especially sites with recreational potential? One example is the ongoing work on the 1,350 plus acre Ducks Unlimited Park, formerly Big River Park, just across the river in Crittenden County.
Yeah, there's a tremendous potential there. I'm honestly not sure what examples we might have where we have worked with landscape architects, whether it be at a zoo or golf course or some other municipal park, other than maybe that Toledo Metro Parks might be an example. One of the reasons one of the places or areas where I'm not necessarily the best expert in this is because examples of those type of projects, because I'm not the biologist that gets out in the field anymore, and I'm not involved with a lot of specific projects. But that's a very intriguing one, and we have tried to do some work in urban settings, and I don't know the specifics of that, but that is a growing interest, I will say, to the entire waterfowl wetland management community, because we recognize that people will care about only those things which they see value in. And where do most people live now? It's in urban settings. And so there is an opportunity and really a need for delivering some of those wetland restoration activities in those locations and working with those different groups. And we are experimenting with some of those. The Ducks Unlimited Park is one example of that. I know we're all excited to see how that turns out. I think there are a few other examples around the country that we've tried. I can't speak firsthand to how they've turned out, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting. Oh, and here's a follow-up to that. Just follow up on Ducks Unlimited Park. A landscape architecture firm, Ritchie Smith Associates, is working very closely with DU staff in Memphis and Jackson, Mississippi, to create the vision for this great park. And this is from Ritchie Smith.
There we go. Okay. That sounded like that was a Ducks Unlimited staff member. So thank you there. Thanks, Rich. Rich can jump in
Okay.
here. Rich can jump in here and correct me if I said anything else wrong.
Okay, and so I will ask what looks like probably our last question about climate change. What DU is seeing? I'm sure you're seeing impacts, but maybe it's too soon to tell us what they are. What do you think?
Was there a specific angle to that question? Like, how is it affecting waterfowl, or was it
wetlands, on wetlands, and especially in Canada, and then waterfowl populations in general?
Yeah, that's a big question, and the effects of climate change are not the same across all geographies. There's been a lot of work done to try to simulate and model future changes to different precipitation regimes, temperature regimes. And in some cases, the projections would show an increase in precipitation in some of those landscapes, and others certainly drier landscapes and less water. That's kind of up in the prairies, and changing the frequency of these drought cycles. There's always a lot of noise around those projections. One of the things, though, that we can say, and we're already seeing in some landscapes in the West, and for that matter, other landscapes also, is increasingly limited water supplies. And there's no single factor driving this. Climate change is definitely one of those factors, but a growing human populations in some of those landscapes is another part of that. There are increasing demands for a smaller water supply. Smaller water supply in some of those Western landscapes is related to reduced winter snowpack, certainly a climate-related change there. But it's also, those pressures also stem from growing human population, continued need for agricultural irrigation, endangered species needs when we're talking about fish and their need for minimum stream flows. Then we could also look to the places like the Gulf Coast, where increasing human populations and reduced rainfall, increasingly severe droughts are pressuring those water supplies. And pretty much all throughout the Western U.S., there is a trend for increased aridification of those wetland landscapes. Been some great research documenting those changes that have already occurred. So that's just kind of on the wetland side of things, and the changes in the availability of water to provide for those wetlands that we're seeing those changes. When it relates to, when we talk about how will climate change and the different ways that climate change manifests itself through increasingly warmer winters and more extreme storm events during winter, and maybe more frequent drought, those things, less snowfall in northern latitudes, those things will influence the distribution and the timing of migration of waterfowl, and we're already seeing that. Waterfowl are migratory animals. They respond to where they go is a reflection of where the resources are that they need to survive and reproduce and do what it is that they're trying to do. And so waterfowl have been changing their distributions for as long as we've been collecting data to document those distributions. We've seen geese essentially abandon portions of the Texas coast, not entirely driven by climate. It's partly driven by a reduction in the available food base, habitat base for those birds there along the Texas coast. Some of the same things we're seeing in Louisiana. And also, but there are some other examples where increasingly warmer winters are allowing species such as mallards and black ducks to winter at northern latitudes. And so yeah, there's a number of ways in which a changing climate is influencing the type of work we do and the type of conservation planning that we're working on, and we're partnering with a lot of climatologists to quantify those and try to develop those future projections. Our colleagues in DU Canada are leading the way on some of that, and across the breeding landscapes. Increased severity of wildfires in boreal Canada is also an issue. So we could go pretty much every corner of North America and talk about certain examples. And there's no easy solutions other than we have to keep asking those questions, never stop collecting the data to help us understand how, what changes are occurring, how the birds are responding to those changes, and then make sure we're able to adapt our conservation programs in light of those changes and what we think the future may hold, so that we can continue to support these populations into the future and ensure that they remain resilient to all of these changes that are inevitable.
Great. Well, I think that's it for questions. And I want to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's going to be a really important resource on our YouTube channel. And thank you for the work that DU does. It has such tremendous value on such a large scale. It's really quite amazing what you have done. So I am going to turn you over to Eric, who will take us out. So thanks so much.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Brasher. I was particularly interested in Howard Marsh and learning more about that, but we'll save that for another time. But thank you again for joining us this evening, and thank you to Ducks Unlimited and the team there that has supported the Wolf River Conservancy so well over the years. Many local to Memphis Ducks Unlimited staff members have been involved with the work of the Wolf River Conservancy for a long time, so we appreciate that. But thank you everybody who has joined us this evening for this incredible presentation. It will be posted on our YouTube channel within the next few days, so if you are interested in rewatching any portion of it, it will be available. If you're interested in any of our programming or upcoming events, please check our website. Again, we have our first Saturday paddle coming up and a new event for us. We're showing a movie night at the North Mud Island Trailhead of the Wolf River Greenway on September 6th. We'll be screening the Lorax. So we hope everybody can join us out there for a nice evening on September 6th. The movie starts at 7 p.m. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.